All right, so this will be a longer one, the first long form video that I will do for YouTube. So I wanted to run through a resource that I sent out to our team before Down Under 2024. And it was a way that I wanted them to change the way they looked at their warm-ups as not a chore, but as something that was actually performance enhancing. So this guide that I put together had 4 main components to it. It touched on warming up specific movements to the event they were about to complete, different breathing techniques that they could utilize prior to the event, monitoring stiffness, and understanding metabolic demands of each workout and making sure that they're warming up specific to that. So we're going to work our way through these one by one. So let's address one of my favorite things to talk about first, and that is breathing and breathing mechanics. One thing that a lot of people look past is that breathing is movement specific. And for you to go into a specific event with a specific series of movements, you want to ensure that you're mimicking those sorts of movements in your warm-ups with the way that you breathe. As you can imagine, hanging from a bar or being in a handstand hold upside down or the bottom of a squat or a compressed position on a rower, these are all putting different types of strain on your diaphragm and the way that you breathe. So by you in your warm-up mimicking these movements and going through some sort of box breathing or breathing techniques is a good way to, when you actually go out onto the competition floor or just a workout in your gym, you're not going to go straight into that high intensity and not be comfortable putting yourself in those positions and breathing hard because you've done that in your warm-up. It's not going to be as much of a shock mentally, and it's just not going to be much of a shock to your breathing mechanics to actually be in those positions. So highly recommend assessing the movements that are coming up and mirroring some of those positions and utilizing box breathing or some sort of breathing technique before you actually start the general prep or the metabolic prep of your warm-up, which we'll go through now. The next thing I want to talk about is what people would refer to as general prep or metabolic prep, and that is referring to essentially getting your muscles, your nervous system, and your joints warm for the event that is specifically coming up for you. I talk a lot about this in the context of CrossFit because I feel like that's the people that I work with. Probably the people that I work with are going to be watching this, but you can take these principles and apply it to your sport specifically very much. So when it comes to metabolic prep, there's a few things to think of. One of them is, what are the peripheral energy systems that you're going to be utilizing? So what is the duration of the event that you're doing? Is it something that's short? Is it something that's long? And then how are you going to approach that warm-up? With long things, with long events, you're generally going to want to warm that up through a lower intensity monostructural piece, like whether it's a bike or a run or you're on a rower, with short cyclical bursts of output to encourage oxygen to muscles, but we're not trying to fatigue ourselves. We're not trying to elevate our heart rate too much, as we don't want to enter that event with a super elevated heart rate. We want to try and remove tension through potentially foam rolling and these longer, slower warm-ups with the more bursts added into them, in comparison to something that is going to be a lot shorter, potentially something like a 1RM event or something that's just sub 7 minutes, where you're generally going to do things that are a little bit more high intensity. You might be doing movements that are like, once again, it's always going to be event specific, but it'll be plyometric and moving stuff that's slightly heavier, similar to the loads that you're about to encounter. And you're going to be doing these faster, and you're generally going to be warming up for a longer period of time, because warming up those shorter, higher intensity peripheral energy systems are going to require that from you. It's going to require you to elevate your heart rate as well so that you can enter the event with an elevated heart rate. So you don't go out there completely calm, heart rate goes from resting to 90%, you have a massive adrenaline dump, and then you feel terrible. So you're going to be going through all the movement-specific movements, but at a higher intensity, once again, still trying to not over-fatigue yourself, but get those fast twitch muscle fibers firing, get the joints warm that you need to get warm, get the muscles warm that you need to get warm, and enter the floor or enter the workout with a slightly elevated heart rate. So the next thing we're going to talk about is tension or stiffness. Tension is the difference between getting in the bottom of a squat and being absolutely crumbled, or doing a longer aerobic workout where you should be calm and relaxed, but you're in a front rack carry and your biceps are absolutely blown up because there's way too much tension. So we want tension when things are heavy, when things are going to be short, sharp, and intense. And we don't want tension when things are going to be more aerobically demanding and longer. So for example, in the context of a 1RM, we want to maintain tension through doing short, cyclical, explosive warm-up specific to the event, so we can maintain the tension that we have when we go out there, that we can get under the bottom of a clean or under the bottom of a snatch and feel strong and stand it up. And then when we have a more aerobic, longer piece, we want to remove tension through static dynamic stretching, through foam rolling, through more aerobic style warm-up, so we can remove tension. So then when we go out into the event, that we're not feeling super tight and our muscles are ready to perform for an extended period of time. So that's another thing that people probably maybe partially understand the concept, but that's the reframing that I want you to think about, is how you look at tension before the event and the specifics of the event that are coming up. And the last thing that I'm going to talk about is addressing specific mobility limitations that you have. Now, it's funny, coming from combat sports, and even just like field sports in general, is you generally would have this like routine warm up, like before you go out on the field, you do all these specific things because you essentially knew what was coming before you'd step out onto the field or onto the mats, etc. So there was always this routine, and there was always a little bit of a spiritual component to that warm up. It was like embedded into you essentially. Whereas with CrossFit, it's just so event specific. Like even maybe for someone like me who is limited in their overhead mobility, where it's just not great, even though that's poor, I'm not going to address that in my warm up if there's a movement that doesn't actually need to have overhead mobility addressed. So once again, you want to understand yourself as an athlete. Fortunately for CrossFit, very sagittal planes of movements. A lot of the mobility limitations can be assessed for you as an athlete, and you know what you have to work on before you step out to these events. But looking at the workout that's coming up and saying, okay, I understand that I am an overhead limited athlete and workout has snatches in it. So I'm going to focus specifically on getting my overhead mobility where it needs to be, because that is going to play a massive role in my performance when I step out onto that field. So it's once again, it's having a good understanding of you as an athlete, where your mobility limitations lie, and addressing those specific to the workout. Mobility limitations that are going to come up, and not just because you suck at a specific thing and you just go, all right, I normally just go in and do some SOTS presses and I do all this like random shit like I would before my soccer match, because it's not a routine. You're looking at the event and you're creating this warm up specifically for it. So that's the thing that I'm trying to cover here, is essentially, rather than just having the same routine every time, look at what is there, address your specific limitations for the workout, rather than just going through this mindless ritual like you would have before you stepped out onto the soccer pitch or before you went and played cricket. So the 4 main takeaways that I want everyone to have from this video is: 1, how can I address my breathing mechanics for this workout specifically? How can I go through my general or metabolic prep specific for this workout to give myself the best performance, whether it's just in the gym or for a competition? How can I optimize tension and stiffness? Am I going into my strength piece first? Am I going into some sort of big aerobic piece? So how can I either optimize or increase or reduce tension? And finally, how can I address my specific mobility limitations in this workout that's here, after going through a good mobility assessment, whether it's by yourself on some sort of stretching app like Warmup, or you've had a coach do it for you, and just address those limitations that you know are specific to you. Finally, if you found any of the content from this video informative, I'm going to leave a link in the description of this video, which has the document that I sent out to all of our athletes for Down Under. Pretty much covers everything regarding warm-ups like we've just spoken about, cool downs specific to just the psychology component and the physiology component. We touch on some nutritional things in there as well, which I know I did send out the nutrition guide the other day talking about on my Instagram, but there is some more nutrition stuff in here, but mainly warm-ups, cool downs, and the physiology surrounding that sort of stuff and why I get people to do what they do. So if any of that interests you, check out the link in the description. Otherwise, I will see you on the next long rant.